Hello and welcome to the first episode of Critical Q&A for 2022. This is the show where I answer your questions based on what you have sent me by email at askchrisshelton@gmail.com or have left for me in the comments section of my Q&A videos. All right, guys, so here we go. Boy, a rock'em sock'em beginning to 2022. I hope, I pray, I cross my fingers that I think happy thoughts that this year is going to be better than last year in a lot of ways. And if you guys listened to my podcast, which was a year in review, sort of looking at all the Scientology news and a few other things, then you'll know that I am trying to maintain a positive, optimistic outlook on things, and a lot of good reasons to do so, especially in the world of Scientology and in general awareness about destructive cults out there, without getting into all the craziness of all the craziness. And there's a lot of craziness, of course, to get involved in. But here we are to discuss coercive control, manipulation, influence, and destructive cults. So let's go ahead and stick with that. Nick C. One of the tools Scientology uses for attracting new members is the so-called Oxford Capacity Analysis. For the benefit of the fellow listeners, the OCA has no relation to either the city or the university. It is a questionnaire devised by Ray Kemp in 1959 and eventually attributed to Hubbard. The test is administered to random passerbys, often in public spaces, such as street fairs. The OCA consists of 200 questions. After the respondent answers the questions, test results are printed out in the form of a graph, and the person administering the test explains to the respondent what the graph supposedly shows. The OCA is supposedly designed to elicit problem areas in the respondent's life. In reality, its purpose is to entice the test subject into visiting the local org to find out how Dianetics and Scientology can help them with the problems supposedly identified by testing. Please correct me if my description is off. I have heard that very rarely the OCA produces results that the person administering the test must interpret as, "We can't help you." Is this true? If so, what would produce this kind of outcome? Would it be a trouble-free person or an irredeemable basket case, or is it something else entirely? All right, Nick, thank you very much for this well-described question here. And I will say, only to correct you, that the OCA is not really used in street fairs or out on the street to get people into the churches or the orgs. There are testing centers that are set up to bring people in so that they will get tested, and then they could get sent off to the major org if they have a remote test center sort of set up. But very, 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 very few places have anything like that. I think Seattle is the only one that comes to mind right away. And so usually they do it in the org, and the sort of outreach activity you describe more often now is, and has been for forever, is pinch tests. And with the meter, they do these things called stress tests, and they try to entice you with the e-meter, and it's a scientific rendering of your day-to-day problems. And that's what's supposed to entice you to then buy a book, which then gets you into the org, or they'll try to schedule to come into the org to do the testing there. And they control the whole line and kind of run you through it. And the idea is that you come in, you do the test, you wait for the results, they sit down, they interpret the results for you, and then they try to sell you something based on those results. So most of what you described is 100% accurate. So that all being said, in terms of what kind of results you could get, there isn't a result that I'm aware of, and I did OCA evaluations, and I read the materials when I was in the church about OCAs and about how they are graded. I did grading. I understood the testing manuals. I was pretty familiar with it. It wasn't a passing thing for me. And I never saw a result that was, okay, kick the guy out the door. But there are a couple results that come to mind for me that might make a test interpreter or a salesperson give up more easily on whether somebody is a prospect or not. And I thought of, off the top of my head, 3 things. Now, of course, maybe there is, because there have been changes in Scientology since I left, I always have to allow for the fact that maybe Miscavige introduced some idea that there are people who come in who can do a test And there are certain results that are just unacceptable. But that wasn't the case as of 2013 when I left. So what I can say about this is there's actually, you might be interested to know, there's very little from L. Ron Hubbard himself on what the OCA actually means, what the test results are. He was pretty broad in his interpretations of how the test works, and he said that if the test is low on the left and low on the right, in other words, if it was kind of an arc kind of a graph, or it was low here and then it kind of went up and in the middle area and then crashed on the right, that meant that the person was out of valence and psychotic, which means they were being out of valence, means you're being somebody else. You've cloaked another personality over yours, and you're now exhibiting behavior and symptoms or behavior and language and mannerisms that are very much like somebody else's personality that you've taken on. That's called being in somebody else's valence in Scientology. And a valence is a word in Scientology for a personality or a package of behaviors and ideas and mannerisms and stuff that would demonstrate a person's personality. So you find people out of valence by being their mother or being their father or being some famous person or being an authority figure who they think they need to emulate. And it becomes, in Scientology, it's sort of formulated as a subconscious construct more so than something that you're knowingly doing. But clearly, you're doing it because you feel either inadequate yourself or you feel that this other personality is benefiting you somehow. Hubbard said to one degree or another, everybody's out of valence because you have a body, because you are influenced by other people, and the true core essential thing that is you wouldn't really want to be involved with any of this anyway, right? So to that degree of even being here, you're out of valence. But with the test, with the OCA, it means you're really in somebody else's headspace. And the answers apparently are supposed to reflect that. Somehow they're supposed to be able to divine that this is true of you by answering questions like, do you like to browse railway timetables when you're bored? Or are you generally happy? Or do you feel that the modern system of prison without bars is doomed to failure? These are the kind of questions you're answering in this test, right? And it's supposed to determine these deep, things about you and your identity, which is just nonsensically silly. But that's the result, is low on the left, and then low on the right means you're radically, horribly, terribly out of communication. So low on the left means you're basically very unhappy, out of sorts, not getting along with other people very well. And low on the right, out of communication, low responsibility, I believe, means that you are psychotic. So those two things together could tell a test evaluator, maybe this isn't somebody I want to spend a lot of time on. But that's all according to the individual test evaluator or salesperson to make that call. I never saw anywhere in Scientology materials that a person who is low on the left and low on the right is unteachable or is unsellable or is somebody we shouldn't sign up. But it occurs to me that might be one reason somebody might look at that test result and go, oh, wow. Another one is if the test results are all along the top. Just a nice, even, everything's around 100, 90, 80 band. Because the test goes at the top is 100, then it goes down to 0, and then it goes down to minus 100. So you can have negative results along the bottom and very, very positive results along the top. So if all I think there's 10 personality traits that are graphed on the OCA, and if they're all along the top, then you are considered what's called in Scientology theedy-weedy. You're a theedy-weedy case. And a theedy-weedy case is defined as somebody who never, ever did anything wrong to anybody and could never even conceive of doing anything wrong to anybody ever. I mean, you get this idea that it's somebody who is living a life of pure delusion, even according to L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology standards. They are just irresponsible, grossly so irresponsible, so not themselves, out of valence even, that they act as though the world is nothing but sweetness and light and everybody's doing the best they can possibly do and isn't everything wonderful, and it's very kind of Pollyannish, very everything's great. That's thiety weedy, right? Oh, I could just never imagine doing anything wrong to anybody. That really grated on Hubbard's nerves, that kind of attitude, and he called that a thiety weedy case. And if a person comes in and fills out an OCA and there's nothing wrong, you're probably looking at a thiety weedy person, because everybody's got something wrong with them, and everybody usually has enough self-awareness to know something's up with them, even if they're not necessarily willing to tell you about it. And the test results are supposed to reflect that. So that could be another reason why a salesperson might pass or go, yeah, well, this isn't really for you, and just kind of move along. Finally, the third reason I came up with as to why this might occur, why it might be that a person will come in and do the test, get their results, and the person says, yeah, we really can't do a whole lot for you, is it might be that that result comes after the salesperson already tries to get the person, tries to question them, ask them about their test results, go, poke and prod and get the person talking, and the person doesn't talk. They won't talk. They won't say anything. They won't open up. They're just not into telling this stranger about themselves and their personal life and their personal problems. And so if the test evaluator or the salesperson can't break through, then they'll give up. They could easily give up. I mean, you're only going to go so far with somebody, especially on the front lines. When somebody's already an established Scientologist and they've already, sort of drunk the flavor aid, so to speak, and they're in, then you can you can really apply a lot more pressure to them, and you can, wear them down, and then you can spend hours working them over, and you're doing that for significantly more money than what you're doing at the beginning opening gate, where you're just trying to sell the guy a book, get him a cheap course, get him some cheap auditing, and get him started. So the amount of time you're going to put into that is going to be significantly less. And those are the three things I could come up with, and I hope that gives some clarification to how that works. Jonathan Perry. With Mark Bunker's video of November 29th, 2021, showing him talking turkey about Scientology, things are starting to get real and going on record. What do you think would happen to David Miscavige's reputation within Scientology if they lost their tax exemption? That brings up many questions, but maybe you could paint a picture from everything to how they would spin it to how it would affect Sea Org members, public staff, OTs, Tom Cruise, etc. Would Tom Cruise come out and speak publicly against this attack on the church, or get involved at all? Would Miscavige simply blame it on all the members, or would the members start to blame it on him? Would it affect how everyone got paid and the cost of services? I understand that your response would be complete conjecture, but I'm still curious about what you think might happen. Okay, Jonathan, thank you for this. And this is far from the first time I have asked or answered this question about what would happen if Scientology loses their tax exemption. In fact, I dedicated a chapter of my book to how they got their tax exemption back and why this was so important to them. So if you haven't checked that out, please do so. What I want to say here, and bringing this up again, is that yes, the heat is on in Clearwater right now on Scientology, and this is a really good thing. Aaron Smith-Levin's city council run that he's making this year is definitely producing some ripples in the Scientology world there, and Miscavige is desperately trying to make a deal with the city council and the new city manager in order to get this property of land he wants. One wonders if there isn't secret buried treasure there from L. Ron Hubbard or something, the way Miscavige is salivating over this property. But he just has to have it. And so now they're trying to get in with the city council and the new city manager, John Jennings, again. And John Jennings appears to be playing ball and bending over backwards to do anything Miscavige wants. And that's quite disgusting and sad. So, we'll see what happens with that. But the good news is that with Aaron Smith-Levin and Mark Bunker there, they have a real fight on their hands. Scientology does. And I say, it's high time. And the citizens of Clearwater are saying it's high time. So I wish the city council would, kind of take note of that and get to it. As far as the tax exemption goes, it would be not necessarily in and of itself the death knell for Scientology if it were to lose tax-exempt status. It operated without tax-exempt status for decades, remember. And they would go right back into defense mode, circle the wagons mode, and they would not pay the taxes, and that tax bill would accumulate as they fought it again the same way they fought it before. I mean, there really wouldn't be a whole lot of difference for any reason I could think of, especially since Miscavige still runs the show. And people would, he would spin it in such a way that the Scientology public would get a target, whether it's the IRS or it's Leah or Mike or me or other people, or it's some other agency, or it's the government itself, or. There are a million ways Miscavige could spin something like that. A lot of it might have to do also with why they lose their tax exemption. If it was because of the reason they lost it, if it was for the same reason, rather, they lost it back in 1967 because L. Ron Hubbard was personally profiting, and the IRS proved that. They had the paper trail to show. It's called inurement, and it's illegal, and it's not something that L. Ron Hubbard had a right to with the tax exemption. And so they took it away. And so Miscavige, could be a similar case could be made in his direction about that. And if it were, and the IRS bought that, then that could be, if that were the reason, then the blame would be 100% on Miscavige's doorstep. But he wouldn't spin it that way. He'd have to obviously describe it some other way. But that also might, but that could be publicly revealed, and then that could be a problem for him. So if that were the case, then Miscavige could have some internal PR issues, and Scientologists could turn on him, and that could be kind of nasty, kind of fast, because that might be the fastest way to get him out, and somebody else steps up and takes over. Whether that new person is a, good or bad person, well, they're going to be a Scientologist, and they're going to be a Sea Org member. And that's, so kind of all bets are off as to what that is, what would turn up there. And that's just one conjecture, right? What if Miscavige were to be criminally indicted for something else? What if, right? There's so many different scenarios that you can see that I can't really talk intelligently about all of them because there's too many of them. There's too many plausible ways that Scientology's tax exemption could actually be taken away if certain factors were to fall into play or certain other things were to happen. Tax exempt status could be something that could be lost as a result of the Masterson case in a way further down the road, not next year, but down the road. If Scientology were found to be actively covering up criminal acts like sexual assault, then that would very much call into question their tax exemption, I believe. So, so you have a lot of different avenues of approach there. Would Tom Cruise come out and speak publicly against any attack on the church or about tax exemption being lost? You bet he would. And anybody else that they could get. And this would where we would see the rubber meet in the road in terms of loyalty to Scientology, because all forces would be brought front and center. If they were fighting for tax exemption, Miscavige would pull no punches, and it would be every hand on deck, and that would include the celebrities. So you would find out very quickly which celebrities are still around and willing to speak up for Scientology and which aren't. Right now, they all get to kind of hide, but if this were to happen, you would see that very quickly, and I'm sure Tom Cruise would be at the front of the line on that. He's pretty fanatical, and unless there's information otherwise, and so far there has not been 1 ounce or shred of evidence that Miscavige is anything, or Tom Cruise is anything but a religious fanatic. And then as far as, it would definitely affect how people get paid and cost of services, because money would become tighter, and costs of services would be affected because people would not be able to write off those services on their taxes, on their tax forms. They would no longer be charitable donations. So that would be a huge blow to the church. And if the IAS, the International Association of Scientologists membership fund, if that were to not, be subject to taxes, I believe then donations to that would become a lot less because people wouldn't be able to claim it on their taxes. So that's kind of some immediate fallout I see from that, or some thoughts I have on that, and I hope that helps clarify that. Logamug. In John Atack's book, he describes how extremely rare Class 12 auditors were. Assuming this was the case, why and what are the practical differences between Class 12 and 11 auditors? All right, thank you for this question. And I did do a couple videos breaking down all the levels of training in Scientology, and I'll put a link to that here, as part of that Bridge to Total Freedom, I broke down both the auditing and training sides. So I have addressed this on video pretty thoroughly in those videos, but let me answer the question here as well to say that how it works is the top 3 class of auditors. The auditor training system in Scientology is based on class. So class 0 is your low-level auditor with an e-meter doing actual Scientology auditing in a formal Scientology session. It's not off-the-cuff kind of stuff or Book 1 Dianetics stuff. It's actual formal Scientology auditing. You learn how to do that through this classification system that starts with a class 0 auditor and goes all the way up to class 12. And everything in between gives you more and more knowledge about the history, theory, and practice of Scientology auditing. Class 4 auditors tend to be the most common. Class 0 to 4 tend to be done in kind of a single sort of shot. You get up to class 4, and that's kind of a resting place for a lot of people. That's where you've learned how to do all the Scientology grades and stuff. Anyway, getting up to class 10, 11, and 12, those are the top of the block, and those are only delivered. Those classes can only be taken by Sea Org members. So first off, the entry of admission is you have to be in the Sea Org. And the other thing about that is that class 10, 11, and 12 are only taught at FLAG, at the FLAG land base in Clearwater, Florida. I could not go as a Sea Org member to Los Angeles, to Copenhagen, to Sydney, or any other Sea Org place and learn how to be a class 10, 11, or 12 auditor. Only FLAG. And originally, it was only under L. Ron Hubbard's tutelage on the boats, on the ship. That Hubbard ran, and he trained the original Class 12s directly under his own interning and tutelage. And the reason that 10, 11, and 12 are grouped together like that is that they represent a series of actions called the L rundowns. That's what you learn how to audit as a Class 10, 11, and 12 auditor, is you learn how to audit L10, L11, and L12. And those are the levels that you learn how to deliver. Those are only offered at FLAG. They are the single most expensive auditing Scientology delivers. It can cost upwards of $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 just for a 12.5-hour block, a single intensive of Scientology auditing by a Class 10, 11, or 12, mainly by a Class 12, because you don't see 10s and 11s. You see them in training, but 12s are pretty much the guys who deliver all the L rundowns. So if you're going to pay for a Class 12 auditor's time, you're going to be paying thousands and thousands of dollars for each intensive. And those intensives are used to deliver to you, not the lower level auditing you can get at your local org. You don't want to go pay Class 12 rates for that. You pay for those L rundowns. And sometimes you pay for those auditors to deliver whatever setup or prerequisite actions you're going to need to do those L rundowns. And I've talked about the L rundowns before. I won't repeat all that here. They are the super secret, super special, high intensity rundowns that are supposed to supercharge you as a spiritual being. They are not the Otils. They're not Xenu. They don't have to do with body thetans. The Ls have nothing to do with any of that. The Ls are their own thing. And they address very specific things that are supposed to be very, very deep core elements of you as a spiritual entity in this universe, and that things that are holding you back, that are deep, deep, deep down inside of you, things like evil intentions, overts that you've committed that are very, very serious, way, way back in the past. And the L's sort of address that and other attitudes and ideas and stuff that you have. So that's kind of what that auditing is. It's very weird. The actual L's have never actually leaked out of the church. Only people's recollections of them, people who were trained on them, like Karen Della Carriere. She is a Class 12 auditor. And she has all those secrets. She knows all those rundowns. So people like her have from memory written down the L's and posted them online. And that's what we know about them. But I'm just noting they've never actually leaked. And there are new Class 12 auditors now, but they are not trained through all the same levels that they used to have to go through in order to be Class 12 auditors now. So they're kind of what L. Ron Hubbard would call quickie Class 12s. That's the system that Miscavige has put in place now because he got rid of all the old Class 12s because they were loyal to Hubbard. They weren't loyal to him, right? They were trained by L. Ron Hubbard. They were around during L. Ron Hubbard's time. I mean, these were OG Scientology auditors who had invested years and years and years of work into becoming the best auditors they could. And so Miscavige got rid of all those guys. And now he's had to make new ones because you have to have Class 12s in order to deliver those L's and flag runs on those L's. If they're not delivering those L's, then there is a real problem. Because that's the biggest moneymaker they've got. So anyway, that's kind of the picture with that, and I hope that helps clarify what that's all about. Paul, L. Ron Hubbard attempted to make the screenplay Revolt in the Stars into a film, which seems to be essentially the Xenu story. Surely if this did end up being turned into a film, then everyone could see it, and this part of the so-called secret levels would simply end up in the hands of everyone. Regardless of the nonsense of getting sick or dying if you are exposed to it and the obvious contradictions making this public, is there not a real chance that this would have led to even more public ridicule of Scientology brought upon by itself if they released it as a film, as opposed to exposure by others? Also, would it not reduce the cash flow if OT3 is basically available to all? Who's going to pay thousands for what would end up being a public DVD? Okay, now I get to pontificate about Revolt in the Stars and talk to you guys about this because I finally sat down and read it. And it actually isn't a screenplay. I've been describing it for years as a screenplay because I never actually went and read the whole thing. I knew about it. I knew what it covered in a way, but it was really good to dive in because what I found out is that it's actually written more like a novella or a short story, including thoughts and ideas and things that people are having. It's not a screenplay, not even, and it's not what you call a treatment. It is awful. I mean, like Battlefield Earth awful. Like, it's bad. It would be awful. So PR-wise, they definitely would not be doing themselves any favors telling this story. And the way it's told is absolutely moronically, idiotically stupid. Exactly as I debunked in my book on OT3. Like, why doesn't OT3 actually make any sense? Because it's logistically impossible to take billions of people and transport them to a planet in airplanes, throw them all in front of volcanoes and blow them all up, and get that all done within less than a year's time. I mean, give me a break. And even the way Hubbard describes it in the whatever, the Revolt in the Stars, whatever it is, I'll just call it a story. How he describes it in there is just as bad as how he describes it in the actual original OT3 materials. So it's just childishly stupid storytelling. Now, that sort of creative criticism to the side, now I want to differentiate and make, and I've said this before many times, but now I get to harp on it a little bit more. The important thing about OT3 is not Xenu. It's the body thetans. It's the clustering of thetans together and the fact that those make up your body now. That's the part that's scary and freaky and is supposed to cause you to get pneumonia and die. Not the Xenu story, which sounds and looks exactly like a science fiction story. And here's how I can say that is because Revolt in the Stars is just the science fiction part. It doesn't talk about or mention anywhere in the story thetans, spiritual entities, body thetans, clustering, none of that. None of the implanting is there that I saw. I mean, they just blew everybody up. Hubbard creates a story where Xenu, as this galactic overlord, as this sole ruler of this, I think it's 56 planets is what he puts in the story. This ruler is this tyrannic despot, and he gathers all these people up using renegades exactly as described in the OT3 write-up, and he brings them all to Earth, and he blows them all up at Mount Shasta, Mount Hood, Mount Vesuvius, every volcano Hubbard could name, even though this happened so many millions of years ago that those volcanoes didn't even exist and the Earth wasn't even the same. But we're not going to have to debunk it at that level. That happens in the story, but none of the spiritual part of that OT3 narrative, the Scientology part of that picture, that's not in the story. So the idea of the Revolt in the Stars was Hubbard was going to use the story, the sci-fi part of it, to get everybody all riled up and re-stimulated, and oh my God, and that would attract their attention, he thought, to L. Ron Hubbard and his other works in Scientology, and then they would come into Scientology and learn about Thetans and their own spiritual nature and progress up the bridge and go clear, and then they would get to OT3 and they would read this, volcanoes and blowing people up and Xenu, and they'd go, oh, this is like that Revolt in the Stars movie, except all this other spiritual stuff is now being added into it. And it turns out that the big reveal, that the big punchline at the end isn't that Xenu blew everything up. It's that we were all there, and as spiritual entities, we were clustered together and we were stuck together, and we are now all batshit crazy because we are just one of many entities that make up our body, that make up who we are as human beings, that makes us crazy and act crazy toward ourselves and toward each other. See, it's all the spiritual stuff that's the really crazy, damaging, horrible part of that story, not the sci-fi side of it. So even before anyway, so there you go. So that's why Revolt in the Stars could have been made into a movie, and theoretically, if David Miscavige really wanted to, shoot himself in the head and throw Scientology over the cliff, then they could invest in making that into a movie. But I think Miscavige already learned from Battlefield Earth that that is not a very good marketing strategy, and it did not do them any favors to try to bring L. Ron Hubbard's childishly stupid storytelling to the screen and try to create a blockbuster on the order of Star Wars or Star Trek. And that was what L. Ron Hubbard had in mind when he wrote Revolt in the Stars. Was he even twisted it all around to make it a hero story, and he uses the same hero and heroine that he uses in every one of his stories, including the whole Mission Earth series. Those two archetypes, those two tropes, those sort of stereotypes are used by Hubbard over and over and over again in his stories. The dashing blonde hero and the beautiful vixen minx heroine female sidekick, and all the cast of criminals and characters. And oh God, Revolt in the Stars is just so awful. It was really hard to read. It really was, guys. The sacrifices I make. Anyway, let's just see. I'm going to see if I missed anything else on this. Yeah, I think I've described the situation, so I hope that that's clear. And if there's anything confusing about what I said here or anything, just let me know and I'll clarify it. Peter, recently I see more individual Scientologists communicate publicly on social media about Scientology. For example, a Charlie Wakely talking on YouTube about how he uses Scientology in his life and interviewing others. Or Spread a Smile videos posted by Scientologists on Facebook and TikTok, as pointed out by Tony Ortega in his recent article, Blame the Media for Fake Virus News. In my perception, this didn't happen so much in the past. I assumed that this would be discouraged by the Scientology organization. Individual Scientologists, quote-unquote, talking Scientology to the world would mean that they also get responses, and Xenu forbid, this might lead to an actual conversation and some out-of-the-bubble thinking. Probably the videos aren't so obvious Scientology, but Charlie? Isn't he guilty of some big no-nos? Verbal tech, talking about his case at a session, inciting others to do the same? Thoughts? Hey, Peter, thank you for this. And I actually sat on this question for a while because I kind of wanted to see how this would play out. And I looked back up on Charlie Wakely's videos. He hasn't posted anything in the last year. And I imagine that he's done posting. He was interviewing Scientologists. He was talking about Scientology and how it might apply in life. And he was doing, in other words, what any Scientologist YouTuber or person who wants to get Scientology out of the big wide world should be doing, which is talking Scientology publicly and arguing it and debating it and bringing it up and sharing it with people and sharing the wins and successes of it. This was what led me to the internet, was the desire to try to use the internet when I was in Scientology to spread the good news and spread the wins and talk about it publicly in a form that, you know, that people can interact with and get curious about. But as you pointed out, what ends up happening is you got to turn the comments off right away because people just pile on with all the truth about Scientology. And these guys cannot engage at that level. They cannot entertain criticism of the subject, and they can't deal honestly with that criticism if they do sillily try to engage. So Wakely's account looks like it's not shut down. The channel's still there, but there's no new content, and I'm thinking there isn't gonna be. I think he did get shut down, and I think that others who try to take a stab at that without doing it through official church channels do get shut down, and they end up having to maybe even shut down their channels. We'll see. As far as the more official, spread a smile videos and stuff, if those are officially endorsed by the church, then that means the church has put some program together and they're trying to use the internet in order to create good public relations. And of course, as any bright, savvy organization would these days, that's the smart thing to do. Scientology is grossly out of step in their entire media. They are the most unsavvy media people I've ever had anything to do with. Because Miscavige purposefully got rid of anybody and everybody who knows anything about it. He doesn't care. Marketing Scientology, the big wide world, is very, very low on his list of things to do. So anyway, so that's why I think you're not going to see a whole lot more of this. I think it was a little flash in the pan, maybe during the pandemic or before, right before, and it was an effort on the part of honest, gung-ho, interested Scientologists who wanted to get the word out there, but the church is not interested in that. So who knows? Who knows if that itself might cause its own level of, some cognitive dissonance with Charlie and others on that line. All right, let's do some flash answers. JAC. I'm interested in understanding what, if any, tax deductions are associated with parishioner course payments. Do they qualify as charitable contributions? I suppose they do, but it's hardly charitable. Well, you answered your own question. That is absolutely right. They are able to take tax donation or deductions based on donations they make to the church for services such as auditing and coursework, as well as membership fees to the International Association of Scientologists, as well as royalty fees or not royalty fees, but fees paid to I think membership dues to WISE and ABLE and stuff like that, the front groups. I think those are all certified as tax deductible as well. Adria Vici Halub. What's your favorite non-original trilogy Star Wars media? If it's a serial media, for example, books, graphic novels, TV series, etc., is there a specific title / volume / episode that stands out as the best one? For me, it's The Mandalorian, both seasons. I'm absolutely floored by how good Jon Favreau is at understanding the core elements of Star Wars at its original basic level. It's not supposed to be about social values and social justice and this and that and the other thing. It's about serialized entertainment as told back in the days of Lash LaRue, but brought into a science fiction realm. And that's what The Mandalorian is, and it's awesome for it. So that is what that is the non-original trilogy Star Wars that I like the most. Travis, what's your favorite conspiracy theory? To be honest, my favorite one, the one that I think is perhaps just the goofiest shit I've ever heard, is that L. Ron Hubbard was replaced as by a body double in 1974, and that was done by the CIA as a targeted op to take over Scientology so that the CIA could control remote viewing in the OT levels and make their own OT soldiers and this sort of core of OT supermen within the United States government to spy on its enemies remotely with telepathically, and even be able to influence things, from the other side of the world. I think that's awesome. And on top of that conspiracy theory comes another one, that David Miscavige was a CIA plant designed specifically to take Scientology and run it off a cliff and dispose of it so that the government could have it all for themselves. Yeah. Okay, guys, that's our show for this week. Thanks very much for tuning in and listening to me blabble on here. I hope that I will see you guys next week. And of course, if you're loving this channel or liking what I'm doing here, please consider supporting me through Patreon, PayPal, or otherwise. I definitely appreciate the love. All right, guys, see you next week. Bye-bye.